Roronoa Zoro has been slinging blades and snatching souls ever since he first began his journey to become the world's greatest swordsman. From his years as the infamous pirate hunter to his new career as the most dangerous member of the Straw Hats, where he has committed not one but at least 3 massacres. And if you think I'm exaggerating, just watch to the end of this video because I promise you, Zoro is even more bloodthirsty than you might think. Today, we'll be taking a deep dive into the before and after of the people that was unlucky enough to find their way onto the demon swordsman's bad side, but also my evidence-backed theory on how I honestly think that Zoro is a serial, not a liver. Although Zoro has without a doubt unalived a plethora of people prior to even joining the Straw Hats, during his time as the pirate hunter, the first one we learned about canonically is Mr. 7, who fell to Zoro's blade after he was sent on behalf of Baroque Works to recruit Zoro to the criminal syndicate, one that was headed by the warlord Crocodile. Zoro had gained infamy as a brutal but elite swordsman and pirate hunter. Some citizens even referred to him as some kind of demon, making him a perfect candidate for Crocodile's assassination group. But Zoro refused Mr. 7's offer, responding that he would only join if Baroque Works makes him the new boss, patronizing the recruiter. Mr. 7 stupidly attempted to use force against Zoro, and Zoro easily took his life. Mr. 7's demise at Zoro's hands is confirmed by Mr. 1 in the series and the One Piece wiki, but we never got to see the actual scene visually until the One Piece live action. And although it's not a one-for-one remake of the canon story, Oda did oversee the entire project and could have easily had Zoro just knock him out if it didn't fit his vision for the lore. To me, this is 100% a body Zoro caught. Although this fight might not seem that important, I'd argue it is, because it's one of the earliest examples of Zoro's bloodlust. Even though Mr. 7 was kinda rude, given Zoro's clearly superior swordsmanship, he could have wounded him, escaped, or just forced him to submit. Instead, Zoro basically baited him into a confrontation from the start so he could wet his blade. Not that I feel bad for Mr. 7 or anything, I mean he was an assassin, but this sets the tone for what I feel is Zoro's true nature. Captain Morgan. Another reason that the Mr. 7 incident is important is because it adds a lot of depth to when our boy Luffy asked Zoro to join his crew. Though this was under different circumstances, given the last person to try to recruit Zoro was eliminated, Luffy must have really impressed him. Since Zoro has such grand ambitions for himself, he wouldn't work under just anybody. When we first entered Shell Island, all of the residents and even Kobe panic at just the mention of Zoro's name. So it's already implied that Zoro has some kind of dark reputation, even though he does have a soft spot for certain people that he takes a liking to. The whole reason that Zoro ended up tied to a pole at the Marine base was because he unalived, or at least knocked out, Helmeppo's pet wolves to protect Rika, a little girl Helmeppo was harassing. And if Helmeppo didn't leverage the life of Rika and her mother, he 100% would have been Zoro's next body. One of the things I found most interesting the first time I watched One Piece was that the first main antagonist, Captain Morgan, wasn't actually defeated by our main character Luffy but by Zoro. Morgan's was later arrested by the Marines, ironically. And thanks to the Diary of Kobe Meppo cover story, we know that Morgan did escape from the Marine ship that was transporting him, while his son Helmeppo actually joined the Marines himself, alongside Kobe, who formed an unlikely friendship. The last time we saw Morgan was during the Django's Dance Paradise cover story. We see both Morgan and Django napping on their tiny boats passing by each other without realizing. We haven't seen Morgan since then, but we do know that Django goes on to join the Marines as well after a series of events. Chapter 17 is the next time we see Zoro defeat an opponent. Now, this fight wasn't that important to the grand scheme of the story, but it was the first time that Zoro fought an actual swordsman as part of the Straw Hat Pirates. He was also still a little injured, or at least not at his best, but he was able to defeat an upper member of one of the strongest crews in the East Blue, the Buggy Pirates. It was a great fight for power scaling Zoro's level at this time and get a further understanding of his true ambitions. He states that he cannot lose to a swordsman not even once, and destroys Cabaji with his now signature move, Onigiri. This was the first time Zoro ever used Onigiri, a move that was named after the Onigiri Rika gave him.
These donuts are great! Jelly-filled are my favorite! Nothing beats a jelly-filled donut.
And if you're wondering what happened to Cabaji, Well, thanks to him being a part of the Buggy Pirates, he is now a primary member of the Cross Guild, a front-runner alliance for the One Piece and an organization that's upsetting the entire balance of the New World. So it's fair to say that it's good for Cabaji that Zoro was a pirate and not a pirate hunter whenever they cross blades, because his fate would have ended very differently. Moving on, we have the Surat Village arc where Zoro defeats the Meow Band brother simultaneously, but with Zoro's next opponent, he wouldn't be so lucky. In the middle of the Baratier arc, Dracula Mihawk floats up as the saucy vampire god of destruction he is, and teaches Zoro a valuable lesson. There are levels to the swordsman life. Zoro would lose to Mihawk, but his bravery to even face such a sure defeat really showed us Zoro's character and how he really stands on his morals. Zoro had always aimed to defeat Mihawk eventually, as Mihawk is the current wielder of the title World's Greatest Swordsman, and with that being Zoro's true dream for himself, he knew it was only a matter of time before the two would face off. But honestly, us and Zoro knew it happened way sooner than he thought it would. But this did lead to one of my favorite Zoro moments of all time. It is when he knew he was going to lose, and he faced the afterlife facing forward, refusing to flee because
scars on the back are a swordsman's shame.
That is just still so hyped to this day. Although Zoro lost, he did gain Mihawk's respect. Being the nice guy he is, Mihawk decided to just almost unalive him, so that Zoro could grow stronger and face him again one day. This fight taught Zoro just how far the gap in his power level and the strongest swordsman's is. And this is also when he promised Luffy he wouldn't lose again, and this fight taught Luffy how dangerous his adventure to the Grand Line will be. He honestly looked shocked to see Zoro lose. The Mihawk fight would also impact the entire next arc and raise a very interesting question. If Zoro wasn't still wounded by Mihawk, could he have defeated Arlong himself? Let me know in the comments what you think. I might make a whole video about this question. Now back to fights Zoro won. Zoro versus Hatchan, 6 sword style versus the 3 sword style, which eventually does evolve into the 8 sword style. Hatchan was defeated by the Dragon Twister. Hatchan was not only known as the second strongest Fishman swordsman, but also as a Fishman, he is several times stronger physically than a normal human. But even though Hatchan lost, his story isn't going too bad. Even though he has had his ups and downs, he managed to escape marine captivity, and he even made it back to the Fishman Island, starting Takayoki 8. Thanks to Cammy and Pap's support. I love Hatchan's redemption arc, but an octopus opening a Takayoki shop is interesting to say the least. Hatchan aside, many, and I mean many of the other members of Arlong's crew wasn't so lucky. The Arlong Park massacre might have been the first, but it wasn't the last massacre we would see Zoro do with our own eyes. On chapter 72, we see that Zoro had began the battle before Luffy had showed up, and he was sitting there eagerly awaiting for him to arrive, as he was now bored after slaughtering dozens of fishmen, their bodies littered all around him. Later, Arlong returns to Arlong Park, discovering his crew's fate. He screams "brothers" as he holds one of them who is nearing the afterlife. From faint whispers, he discovers it was the pirate hunter Zoro who had done this. And even the mighty Arlong seemed worried, asking, "The pirate hunter? Has he come for my head?" And in case you want to say, this is One Piece, it's possible Zoro just wounded them. Arlong himself tells Usopp he is looking for Zoro because he, quote, slaughtered my men while I was out. And then for more proof, in the same chapter, Hatchan tells Arlong if he was there, he would have stopped Zoro because, quote, I'd never let anyone ill my mates, confirming at least some of his mates are not alive thanks to Zoro. Again, I don't feel bad for the Arlong Park victims. They had been terrorizing small towns all over the East Blue. But as this Reddit user pointed out, at the time this happened, the Fishman hadn't really done anything that extreme to Zoro. I mean, he was looking for Nami on Luffy's orders, but at the time, Zoro didn't even like or trust Nami. He thought she was just really shady. And also, even after the event, even Usopp says, quote, is Zoro nuts? He's got no reason to tangle with these freaks. The Redditor I referenced earlier went on to say that if Zoro did take all the Fishmen's lives for such a, quote, crappy reason, he would have rooted for the Fishman, while others in the comments did defend Zoro, claiming they are all pirates and they knew what they was getting themselves into. I kinda get both points, but either way, Zoro being so nonchalant in Arlong's chair after the incident demonstrates how unaffected he is about taking lives, meaning this wasn't his first cleansing. I also find it telling that even in the volume cover, Zoro's blade is drenched in blood. Zoro's next quasi-opponent is Tashigi. which is a very complicated opponent for Zoro because of her similarities to his childhood best friend, inspiration, and rival Kuina. In chapter 97, Zoro is looking for a new sword. Tashigi shows up and starts nerding out about all the swords because she is like this super sword enthusiast, and it's made pretty apparent that she knows way more about the specifics and history of swords than Zoro, as she recognizes the Wado Ichimonji instantly and the Sword Keeper's Kentetsu. However, Zoro's innate ability to feel a sword's energy and basically talk to it are far superior than Tashigi's, as seen when he risked losing his arm in a bet with the Cursed Blade. Another badass scene by Zoro. When Tashigi finally realizes that Zoro is the infamous pirate hunter and a member of the Straw Hats, as a marine she is forced to attempt to stop him with her blade, but the duel barely lasts a page or two. Similar to the Mihawk fight, this encounter was short but important. It let us dive into Zoro's past a little bit more, and we learn how he does carry a lot of trauma and depth behind those demon eyes. This pretty much wraps up Zoro's fights in the East Blue, but as we enter the Grand Line, we immediately get to see Zoro's inner demon rear its head again, with an even bigger massacre than his Arlong Park rampage. We have now reached the Whiskey Peak incident, and I will be going more in depth in this segment than the others. One, because it's one of my favorite and underrated arcs, but also because I think it's very important to the concept of this video, Zoro's role in One Piece, and the overall story. So please stay with me to the very end because I promise it will all make sense. The first island the Straw Hats stumble upon in the Grand Line is a tucked off island known as Whiskey Peak, which is a lively place where all the people love to party and have a good time, or so it seems. In reality, the town has a dark secret. It's actually a front for Baroque Works, the aforementioned crime group. The goal of the Whiskey Peak operation is the people of the community lure in unsuspecting pirates and capture them, as the residents of the welcoming town are all either assassins, bounty hunters, or associates of the crime syndicate. And given how much the Straw Hats love to party, this trap was tailor-built for them, so the crew quickly fits right in, eating, drinking, and flirting the night away, before eventually they all pass out. Being the two that can handle their liquor the best, Zoro and Nami actually fake being passed out, which led to Zoro thwarting the surprise attack the town had planned, and Nami negotiating one of Baroque Works' target's rescue. After we get to see that all the Straw Hats are passed out, we see Mr. 8 and other named agents discussing how the Straw Hats have fallen into the Abyss, which is what they have named their trap. Some of them get shocked at just how valuable Luffy is after viewing his wanted poster. Mr. 8, staying calm, says never judge a pirate by their looks. That next they should take all the valuables from the Straw Hat ship and then time them up, because if they have to not alive them, their value drops 30%, because the government wants to execute them publicly, to make an example. But very unfortunately for them, there was an even more demonic force that was perched above them, listening to every word. The being spoke, "Sorry, but would you let them sleep a while longer? They're tired from the voyage." Shocked, Mr. 8 asked, "How? You were passed out." The demon replied, "A true swordsman never drinks himself into a stupor, and a den of bounty hunters can be a dangerous place. Looks to be about 100 bounty hunters here. I'll take you all on, Baroque Works." This flabbergasted the assassins even more. How could Zoro know the name of their secret organization, even their most guarded details? Zoro explains that he learned about all their dirty little secrets back when he was in their line of work and Mr. 7 tried to recruit him, implying that he had made Mr. 7 spill the beans before his life was taken. It's chilling to think of what Zoro did to him to make him talk. Mr. 8 says that this is very unexpected, but if you know about our secret organization, then you must be not alive. He says hauntingly, "One more tombstone to adorn the cactus rocks." We pan over to thousands, if not tens of thousands of tombstones that previously appeared to be the needles that give the location the appearance of the giant cacti, meaning the town is responsible for taking the lives of literally thousands of pirates. One of the darkest and also kind of cool references in One Piece. Mr. 8 yells, "Ill him," pointing at the evilly grinning Zoro atop of the building, who looks almost excited. But then, as if he had teleported, he is gone. They look around trying to find him, but Zoro was now behind them, helping him look for himself. They attack, but Zoro is too fast and they only hit themselves with their own bullets. Zoro disappears again and he is now behind Mr. 8 and says, "Wouldn't you prefer a dozen new tombstones?" Zoro escapes the gunfire and they begin to look for him. We see Zoro standing behind a building, grinning at the fact he will get to test out his new swords. 100 bodies will give them a quote, "good workout." A group of the assassins attempt to ambush Zoro, but he easily snatches their souls, only being sad that he spilled some sake after he was attacked with a barrel of it, and he had to cut it. Assassins disguised as a nun and a small child attempt to trick Zoro into letting his guard down, but Zoro sees right through it, defeats them, saying that they should, quote, use that sorry trick on someone with a kinder heart. For the next few chapters, we just see bodies after bodies dropping. The first agent to land even one hit on Zoro is Miss Monday, but a second later, Zoro is palming her skull, mocking her proclaimed strength. After she falls, Zoro licks the blood from his lips and asks if they can keep going, that he likes to finish what he starts. Zoro continues to eliminate them one after another until they attempt to take the sleeping Luffy hostage in hopes of calming down the demon. But after a series of events, Zoro finishes the battle, clearly the winner of the Whiskey Peak incident. Chilling on top of a building, Zoro celebrates his victory with some more sake and enjoys his now quiet night. Until more stuff happens and Zoro gets dragged into a money-making scheme by Nami to save and transport the undercover princess that would go on to be known as Princess Vivi. It's all going pretty well until Luffy wakes up and is shocked that all the nice people he had been partying with have been unalived and their bodies have been scattered across the village. Meanwhile, Zoro is now face to face with Mr. Five and Miss Valentine. Mr. Five asked Zoro, quote, so you're the one who's been illing our people, confirming he had been soul snatching this whole time. So I don't want to hear any, this is One Piece, he probably was just knocking them out. Anyway, before a fight can break out, Zoro hears Luffy screaming his name. Zoro, happy to hear Luffy's voice and that he finally woke up. Hey bro, you don't gotta get involved in this unless you owe money too, I got it. But little did Zoro know that Luffy was on go mode. And he says, I've had it with you, we're gonna fight. Confusing the crap out of Zoro. Monkey D. Luffy versus Roronoa Zoro. Yes, technically Luffy is Zoro's next opponent, but I wouldn't dare call Luffy a victim. In fact, their fight was actually quite even. In Luffy's own words, the townspeople welcomed them, fed them, and showed them kindness, and Zoro, quote, chopped them up. Zoro tried explaining what was going on, but as we know, Luffy is not a great listener and wasn't trying to hear it. He just wanted smoke. Zoro is forced to give it his all because if he doesn't, he might get unalived himself because he realizes Luffy is serious and dangerous. The funniest part about this whole fight is Zoro and Luffy managed to defeat several named officers in the middle of their fight with each other, like it was nothing just because they interfered or got in their way. Luffy and Zoro going all out versus each other was so awesome but scary. Even at this point, there were monsters. This is the closest thing we get to a sky split this early into One Piece. And if it wasn't for the almighty Nami punch that broke the fight up, who knows who would have won? So what do you think? At Zoro and Luffy's Whiskey Peak power level, who do you think would have won? Let me know in the comments. To wrap up this segment, even though they deserved it, Zoro took the lives of countless Baroque work agents. That is at least 100 plus now from just the ones we know about in story. In the next arc, Little Garden, Zoro fights and defeats Mr. Five again. Then in Alabasta, Zoro fights the second strongest agent in Baroque works, Mr. One, aka Daz Bones, which was so impressive it was used by Smoker as a testament to Zoro's strength while he was talking to Tashigi about Zoro. Also, during Zoro and Mr. One's encounter, Mr. One refers to Zoro as the person who not alived 100 of them during the Whiskey Peak incident, which is more evidence confirming at least a majority, if not all of them, did get unalived by Zoro. Zoro's finisher against Daz Bones in chapter 195 is one of the top rawest panels in the entire series. And thanks to this fight, while Zoro's on a mission, he does level up significantly and is even able to cut steel now. The two even have this cheeky dialogue where Bones asks Zoro if he's gonna learn to cut diamond next. And knowing Oda, this is definitely some kind of foreshadowing. After the defeat by the Straw Hats, Bones and Crocodile get imprisoned and impaled down, but they escape with Luffy. They even wind up helping during the Pall Mall War. Currently, Daz is also a part of the Cross Guild since he opted to stay loyal to Crocodile. Following Alabasta, we're now in Mocktown, where Zoro might have personally carved Bellamy in half if it wasn't for Luffy telling him not to, because Luffy felt it wasn't really the place for battle, mirroring the Shanks and Mountain Bandit incident that took place when Luffy was younger in Makima's bar. Then in Skypiea, we don't really get too much Zoro action. He does defeat Ohm, one of the four priests. It was a decent fight, but honestly, the most action Zoro got in Skypiea was getting washed by Enel or Inaru or whatever you call him. But then again, so did like everyone else, so we can't really hold that against him. By the way, did you know what happened to Ohm and the other priests after the conflict was over? We know that Enel escaped to the moon thanks to our Monkey D. Luffy victims video, but did you know his priests were sentenced to a punishment called cloud drifting? Sounds pretty nice, doesn't it? But it's actually an extremely dark punishment. Cloud drifting is a punishment where the criminals are placed on a small island cloud, which is then sent off into the sky to drift around the world indefinitely. It is very much an execution because unless you can fly, you have no way to survive it, and will of course pass away. Eventually, after like a couple centuries, the clouds dissolve, and the corpses of the criminals fall onto the surface world. So in a very roundabout way, I guess you can say that Zoro ultimately did cause Ahm's demise. After Skypiea, we have now arrived at the Water 7 and Enies lobby arcs. During this saga, Zoro catches some W's and some L's. His losses were to Admiral Aokiji and Rob Lucci, and his major wins included Marine Captain T-Bone and of course Kaku, Rob Lucci's second in command. Chapter 371 is where Zoro defeats T-Bone, which gives us not one but two glorious double spreads. The first is where Luffy tells Zoro simply cut it, when referring to a speedaway detached train car. And even though he has done nothing like this before, without hesitation, Zoro replies, "Gotcha," and slices the detached train car in two with one swift move, leaving everyone jaw-droppingly dumbfounded. The second double spread is him finishing T-Bone with his ship cutter attack. This chapter was amazing. But out of all the Straw Hat's victims, I feel bad for T-Bone. He really does seem like a sweet guy, and is one of the few Marines I respect. At the end of the day, he was just doing his job and landed in Straw Hat's way. As for Kaku, him and Zoro might have had one of the most underrated fights in One Piece. Everyone talks about Luffy versus Rob Lucci, which was a great fight, but Zoro versus Kaku was also very good, and it even had a really cool ending. Kaku was the number 2 of CP9, and thanks to him pushing Zoro in this fight, Zoro manifests Ashura for the first time, proving how formidable of an opponent Kaku was. Kaku also was a powerful swordsman, so Zoro defeating him was an impressive swordsman feat, which does help Zoro achieve his own dream. Just following Luffy to the One Piece doesn't guarantee Zoro will accomplish his own dream of becoming the world's greatest swordsman. He does need to also defeat a lot of powerful swordsmen along the way. And if you want to help me accomplish my own dream of becoming the world's greatest One Piece YouTuber, just like this video and subscribe. The like goal for this video will be 194. The Zoro versus Kaku fight ended with another awesome moment from Zoro, where Zoro tells Kaku that they are fired from Galley Law. The next major fight for Zoro would happen in Thriller Bark. During this arc, Zoro fights up against the corpse of the sword god Ryuma. And yes, I know, this one doesn't technically count as a body for Zoro, since Ryuma did pass away long ago and is a zombie, but Zoro was responsible for Ryuma's second death. It should be noted, by the way, that Ryuma was limited by Brook's power level that he was given through Moria's powers, and couldn't use his full potential from when he was alive. So he was clearly not at his peak, and even Zoro says that he wishes he could have fought him at full strength. Either way, Zoro did still earn Ryuma's respect, and was even gifted one of my favorite swords from him, Shishui. Next, in the same arc, we have Zoro versus Kuma. This one was more of a test than a fight, but still managed to be one of the most badass anime moments of all time. Basically, Kuma tested Zoro's loyalty and character by offering him a chance to spare his captain's life if he could take all of Luffy's pain. And given that just a particle of the pain sent Zoro into an anaphylactic shock, Kuma said that taking all of Luffy's pain would definitely not alive him. And given recent events in the manga, this event was even more important for the Straw Hat's fate than even Zoro or us realized. Sanji would step up and try to volunteer as sacrifice, but Zoro would knock him out and request to do it somewhere else away from the crew, leading to the iconic "nothing happened" moment after Sanji finds Zoro barely clinging to life. Zoro would have to face up against Kuma again with the rest of the Straw Hats on Sabaody, where he was overpowered and sent to Mihawk's Island. This is where he would properly heal and spend 2 years of hell fighting countless fights with overpowered monkeys and Mihawk himself. After swallowing his pride and asking Mihawk to make him stronger so he can be at the power level Luffy needs to become the Pirate King. Through these trials and tribulations, Zoro's power level grows astronomically, and he becomes really close to the Ghost Princess Perona, so it wasn't all bad. She even helps him escape in Sabaody and refers to Zoro as her boy toy. I guessed her ghost wasn't the only thing she was calling Boo. After the time skip, even though it's implied that him and Mihawk had plenty of rematches, Zoro admitted that he never beat Mihawk once. Also, during the return of Sabaody Archipelago, in chapter 601, there is this sick panel of Zoro and Sanji simultaneously one-shotting a pacifista, showcasing how strong both of them have gotten, given that the pacifistas used to be a serious threat pre-time skip. After this, during the Fishman Island arc, Zoro fought Hozao and Hody. Hozao is the #1 strongest Fishman swordsman, the one whom Hatchan was talking about previously. Zoro easily defeats him, and to me, this wasn't even a serious fight. Post time skip, Zoro is a completely different animal. He really is allergic to taking L's. Heck, Zoro even literally defeated Hody in water. The main antagonist of this arc, yeah, he lost to Zoro underwater with one attack. Let me rephrase this so I make sure you understand. Zoro, a human, one-shotted one of the most powerful fishmen underwater where they're even stronger. And the dude is even addicted to popping magic fish steroids on the regular. Both of these opponents wound up rotting in prison because of what they did. In Punk Hazard, Zoro fights Monet of the Doflamingo Pirates. This is another one that's barely a fight. Zoro gives both her and Tashigi PTSD with the way he cuts her in half. To me, this was more foreshadowing of Zoro's use of Conqueror's Haki, or whatever Zoro's demonic version of it is, because he has this like aura attack thing that makes people feel like they got not alive, or they're gonna be not alive soon if they keep fighting him or something. I don't really know what it is, but the same thing happens whenever he's gambling in Wano against those people who try to cheat him. I hope this will be explained later because I definitely feel like there's something to it. Again, I feel like it's like a darker, more like demonic version of Conqueror's Haki. By the way, Monet the Harpy is one of my favorite designs in One Piece. Too bad she unallows herself at the end of the arc. In Dressrosa, Zoro technically goes up against Fujitora, an Admiral Swordsman, but it doesn't lead to a proper fight. I would like to see the two really throw down though, especially at Zoro's current power level. Zoro's most impressive fight in this arc was against Pika. And I'm sure you guys can guess how that went. Pika was just another opponent humiliated by post-time skip Zoro. Zoro never really struggles at all until we get to Wano. I honestly have a theory that like this is the reason why Oda has to keep separating Zoro and Luffy, because they are so strong that if they was always together, there is no reason they shouldn't be dog walking most of their opponents. So he has to find creative ways to separate them. Like in the entire arc of Whole Cake, Zoro wasn't really involved in the A story. But luckily for Zoro fans, the entire next and longest One Piece arc was basically Zoro fanfic. We have now made it to Wano. And do you remember how Wano started? Just when you thought I forgot about my whole Zoro unaliver theory, the arc from the beginning was supposed to be dedicated to us getting to know Zoro. And so the arc begins, featuring Zoro, who has been condemned to commit seppuku. And the magistrate who sentenced him to it on accusations of committing murder is holding Zoro's sword Shishui in his hand. But then, right before Zoro plunges the blade into his stomach, he smells blood on the magistrate. He realizes that the magistrate is the murderer and was trying to frame him. So Zoro takes the same blade and launches a long-range attack that not allows the magistrate, and he takes out his samurais that attack him after. That's right, another massacre. Our boy had another one in him. I even forgot about this one until I was researching this video. I remembered he took out the magistrate, but I completely forgot he soul snatched so many of his samurai. I tried to count how many of them he murked, but I lost count at 18. But the scene ends with more samurai surrounding him, so I'm sure the number is much higher. Wano becomes a wasteland for Zoro's victims and his opponents. In chapter 937, he fights Iller, a fellow supernova, but we didn't know his true identity at the time. Zoro eventually defeats him, but I would like to say this is one of my favorite Zoro fights. I love Iller's fighting style. Toei did such a phenomenal job with this animation, and the way Zoro ended the fight again was awesome. He was a very strong opponent, and at the time, Zoro only had 2 swords, needing a third one to fight comfortably. He let himself be hit with a direct attack so he could pull out his opponent's sides from his shoulder and finish him off with his famous 3-sword style. Then in chapter 997, Zoro defeats another supernova, Apu. Not all of Zoro fights at Wano ended up being a clear winner or loser. With the Onigashima raid being an all-out war and more of a group effort, people were swapping out opponents and even jumping people frequently. But Zoro did pull off some of the most impressive solo feats in the entire story so far. Like when he blocks a fusion ultimate attack from 2 Yonko's Big Mom and Kato, 2 of the strongest pirates to ever exist. 1/2 of the 4 strongest living pirates combine an attack and Zoro blocks it. This deserves the hype it gets. Then in chapter 1010, he leaves everyone speechless by becoming the first person since Odin to leave a permanent scar on Kato's skin. And depending on if you watch the anime or read the manga, this is where it's confirmed that Zoro does have Conqueror's Haki. But keep in mind that Kato was never really Zoro's main opponent. Zoro's main op in the raid was King the Wildfire, the gorgeously beautiful vice captain of the powerful beast pirates. If we fast forward to chapter 1035, we have a chapter titled Zoro vs King, one of the best choreographed and animated fights in the series. Both the manga and anime did amazing during this fight. Zoro ultimately won, but King did live up to his hype. And honestly, for a while, things were looking pretty grim for Zoro. And I don't mean because he literally came face to face with the Grand Reaper himself via pushing himself too hard during this fight. To put into perspective how long and grand Zoro vs King was, their fight lasted 57 manga panels across 19 chapters. Though the Onigashima raid was cultivated in a way where it's kind of hard to measure time, just in chapter length alone, this fight was longer than some arcs. During the fight, King lost his reproduction capabilities and even his wing. After the fight, he was so weakened by Zoro that both him and Queen was detained by Green Bull rather easily. Some people debate if we should call King a swordsman, but he is definitely talented enough to earn the title. He just doesn't bound himself by a swordsman's rules and honor code. But this was still Zoro's biggest feat yet towards his own personal dream. Post Wano, we arrive at the legendary island of Egghead. While writing this video, I noticed that Egghead kind of feels like a way for Oda to showcase how strong the Straw Hats have gotten. It parallels a lot of the previous arcs and even shares some of the previous antagonists. For example, in Water 7, Lucci was matched up against Luffy as the primary opponent, and their fight often ranks as one of the top fights in the entire series. But now in Egghead, Lucci was allocated to facing off against Zoro after it was made clear he wasn't anywhere near Luffy's current power level. So far in Egghead, Zoro has faced off against Kaku, S-Hawk, and is still currently fighting Lucci. And I'm not gonna lie, their trash talk towards each other is elite. And although Lucci couldn't defeat current Luffy, he has leveled up a lot and even awakened his devil fruit. So the outcome of this is still uncertain, but I have faith in our favorite Moss Head. The Egghead incident is rather complicated for wins and losses, as similar to Onigashima. People are switching opponents frequently, plus there's a few betrayals mixed in, a few team-ups, and then more betrayals. Even in all the chaos of Egghead, Zoro hasn't really caught another body, but I do still feel comfortable considering him a serial not aliver. The FBI defines them as a person who not alives 3 or more people in the same manner in a period of more than 30 days with a cooling off period between victims. The reason it's worded like this is because if a person just blacks out one time and unalives a bunch of people, they are just emotional with impulse control problems. Serial unalivers, on the other hand, are often calm, cold, and though sinister, can survive in various environments. But they often find themselves in situations where they have to or want to unalive people. Besides all the bodies Zoro has been catching, I honestly think Zoro likes the thrill of the hunt or battle or whatever it is. And I also think if he hadn't joined the Straw Hats, he would have way more bodies. What do you think? Mostly pirate ones, but still. I think his connection he feels to the Straw Hats has actually calmed him down a lot. But even still, he is the darkest Straw Hat by far, besides Robin's sense of humor. Zoro is constantly surrounded by demon, dark, evil, and hell symbology from his moves to his dark aura. These days, the only time he smiles is when he's in an intense battle or whenever he sees Luffy. Some people on Reddit have even went as far as to ponder if Zoro is evil, but I wouldn't go that far. I actually love Zoro. Plus, I'm really glad that he's on our side, but I'm even more glad you made it to the very end of this video. Drop lemons in the comments so I know you're a real one.